What's going on? Raven Ritual 666 back from the dead with a Diablo 4 build guide to the Frost Lord, the Frost Witch, the Sorcerer. So, this is by far is not the best build, but this is a really good build to help you up while you are leveling. So, the central piece of this build comes by the enchantments. So let's have a look at what we mean by enchantments, right? So this is a level 50 build guide, but we are looking at the enchantments. So if you look at ice shards, when ice shards are enchanted, ice shards automatically conjure and fly towards frozen enemies. So this is the basis of what happens with this build, along with pairing Frost Nova and the Vulnerable. And we'll talk about the next enchantment afterwards. So, just as a leveling guide, I've heard a lot of people that are struggling with Sorcerer that are either squishy, they're dying a lot, or they're struggling to do single target damage. Maybe they're doing okay with mobs. So, first things first, just pick up every capstone of nodule of each skill. Don't worry about putting extra points in the damage. So, firstly, Frostbolt. We're going Enhanced Frostbolt and we're going Glinting Frostbolt to make sure that we get the extra mana. Because when we've got downtime from damage, we might need to regen a bit of mana, and this is a good way to do so. It's also going to work well with our Frost capabilities and points. This is a Frost build. There are far more options you can do, but we are purely focusing on cold and frost damage. The next point that is very important is 1 point into Ice Shards. So Ice Shards are awesome. So they can actually like chain and hit multiple enemies, which is why I prefer it over the Frozen Orb. The next point means they have a 40% chance to ricochet, and that's how we're getting that mob damage. And lastly, while you have a barrier active, casts of Ice Shards treat enemies as if they were frozen. Now, you might be tempted to go, oh look, vulnerable. But no, we're not going to use Ice Shards for vulnerable. This is a vulnerable barrier build. So we want, while barrier is active, because we're going to get that consistent 25% increased damage to frozen enemies, and they're going to chain, which is going to help us out for mob damage. Now, if you're struggling to get to this next tree, don't be afraid to put 5 points into Ice Shards. It's okay. I'd prioritize points into Ice Shards. Don't worry about your basic skill, because we're not getting damage or any value out of that. Now, once you're able to get to your defensive skills, we want to go probably Ice Armor. 1 point into mana regeneration while it's up, and then the second point into damage against vulnerable enemies contributes 50% more to Ice Armor's barrier. They actually changed this since the Server Slam. Used to be damage would contribute to 5% more, but it's damage against vulnerable enemies, and that's really good. That's much better than enemies that hit you while Ice Armor's active have a chance to become frozen, because more often than not, we're going to be freezing them before they even get to us while we put up our barrier, and I'll show you. So we want that. Frost Nova is very important, right? So killing enemies while frozen reduces its cooldown. So everything is going to die. It's actually, for a defensive skill, our biggest amount of damage comes off the back of Frost Nova. So, killing enemies frozen reduces the cooldown, but Frost Nova makes enemies vulnerable for 4 seconds, and it's increased to 6 seconds against bosses, which is amazing. There is so much power we can get out of this skill. Just pick up 1 point into Ice Blades, 1 point into reducing its cooldown against every time it hits a vulnerable enemy. And 20% of Enhanced Ice Blades is reduce your other skills. So, the good thing about Ice Blades is that it has a 30% chance to make enemies vulnerable. Now, we do not equip this skill. While you're leveling, yes, equip it instead of your ultimate. But once we've got your ultimate, take off Ice Blades and equip the ultimate instead. So, we're going to use this as our second enchantment, and that's because of the vulnerable tech that it's got, and the reducing of our other skills cooldowns. And I'll show you why after. We do put Blizzard on. I've been testing Blizzard on and off with the enchantments, and I'll talk about it why after. And then we go, while you have an active Blizzard, your core skills cost 10% less mana. It's pretty straightforward. Our core skills are going to be doing the most damage, but it's going to be, once we have everything up, Frost Nova, Barrier, Ice Blades, Blizzard, then core skill, like as many times as you can hit. Then we're going to go to the ultimate, right? Deep Freeze, obviously, we're invulnerable. It does okay damage. We're not trying to proc ultimate damage, we're trying to proc damage to vulnerable and damage to frozen targets. That is how we're getting the most damage out of this build. But we get a barrier when Deep Freeze ends, which again, with our barrier nodule of ice shards, 25% more damage from ice shards, and chains to nearby enemies. So, like I said, it's a barrier build. Lastly, when Deep Freeze ends, your non-ultimate cooldowns are reduced by 50%. I'll show you why this works so well, because it helps us to keep our uptime up of Frost Nova. And we're going to go Avalanche. Your Frost skills have up to a 10% chance to make your next cast of Ice Shards, Frozen or Blizzard, consume no mana, and deal 40% increased damage. So huge damage of Ice Shards or Blizzard. Hopefully it procs for the Ice Shards more often than Blizzard. But the chance is doubled against vulnerable enemies. Now I've tested Shatter. Shatter is good if you want more mob damage, and I might have to come to it later on, but Avalanche is fantastic. So, now with the rest of our points, we're going to go 3 points into 50% increased damage to elites, 12% increased cold damage to vulnerable enemies, it's a vulnerable build, 9% increased damage to chilled enemies, and 18% more damage to frozen, and then lucky hit. Cold damage against vulnerable enemies have up to a 20% chance to generate mana. We can do our core ability. I've seen it proc like 11 times in a row. 11 times, which is huge damage. Now, to pair with that, because we've got lucky hit on Avalanche, we've got lucky hit on Frigid Breeze, we're gonna increase lucky hit. So crit strikes have up to a 15% chance to reset the cooldown of one of your defensive skills, which means more time for Frost Nova, more time for Barrier, more damage. We are gonna go 1 point into Align the Elements. The damage reduction is pointless, but we want the 1 point into Protection, because using a cooldown grants 10% of your max life as a barrier for 2 seconds. We don't care about how much barrier we have, but it's only 2 seconds, right? So we don't need more barrier life. We just want the uptime of the barrier, because we're going to get barriers proccing all the time with ice armor and off our aspects, which I'll share with you in a bit. And we're going to go 1 point into your barriers have increased duration, and ideally, once I've got more renown, I'm going to put the extra 2 points into here. And 3 points. While you have a barrier active, you apply 24% more chill. That is more damage, more frozen enemies, and more vulnerable. Okay, so to break that down, the most important part is having these enchantments. So Ice Shards is a must-have. It just, like, as soon as you pop Frost Nova, everything becomes vulnerable, and you get free Ice Shards that just, like, home in and just... You don't have to press any buttons. You can just press Frost Nova, your defensive skill, and that mob will die. So you run into a mob, press Frost Nova, they all die. The reason we're doing Ice Blades, right, is because it can reduce our cooldowns, but also it applies vulnerable. So when we're on a single target like a boss, and we're out of Frost Nova charges, when everything's on cooldown, Ice Blades are going to spawn. They're going to help reduce our cooldowns, and they're going to apply vulnerable. Now, I did test putting Blizzard on as an enchantment, and to be honest, it's very good. It keeps applying a Blizzard over you every 15 seconds, and it follows for 16 seconds. So the uptime is good, because also Blizzard is very expensive to cast, where Ice Blades are not. But the crowd control damage off of Blizzard is not as effective, because a lot of the time we're hitting enemies from further away, rather than right onto us. So that's what the skill and our build is all built around. About Frost Nova, proccing vulnerable, using barriers to chain ice shards, and we get a lot of damage out of it. So let's have a quick look at our gear. So I'll talk through what's important, and then what I've got that's not. So this is a very good aspect. You deal 22% increased damage to vulnerable enemies while you have a barrier. I put life on kill, because a little bit of health regen is nice. And what we're looking for in a weapon is damage to slow, damage to crowd control, damage to slow, and vulnerable. Those are your 3 key things you're looking for to do damage. If you don't get damage to slowed or damage to crowd control, go core skill damage. It's going to help you massively with damage uptime, especially on bosses, so core skill damage is also good. But as long as you get 2. Vulnerable is the most important, and then either slow or crowd control. Very nice. Now, I do go a staff, because, especially while you're leveling up in early game, being able to apply the aspect, see, I get 22% vulnerable, because it's a 2-handed weapon, rather than 11%. So, very nice to have. If you don't have that early on, you can find the aspect. Ice shards pierce 3 times, dealing 25% less damage per subsequent hit. If you put that onto a 2-handed weapon, your ice shards will pierce 7 times, dealing 13% less damage per hit, which is a lot of uptime and a lot of damage off those ice shards. So if you don't have the vulnerable, it's okay. Just swap those 2 aspects around. Now, they're both crucial and important to have. Next up, damaging an elite enemy grants your barrier, absorbing 810 damage over 10 seconds. It can only happen once every 30 seconds. Very nice. Remember, it's a barrier build. The more barriers, the more lucky hits, the more damage. Very nice to have. The rest of these aspects are less important, but dealing 60% increased damage while you have a barrier is very nice to have. The other key aspects, like what I have right now, is damage reduction. It's okay for my chest piece. My blizzards spawn exploding ice spikes. That's okay. The one key piece that I'm missing is there's a helmet that spawns that gives me a second charge of Frost Nova. Now, that is what I am looking for to make this build more perfect. So, other aspects that are very good to have is while you do damage standing still, if you put out an amulet or like 7.5% damage per second, you increase your attack power. So that's the first thing I'm going to put onto my amulet now. The next thing I'm going to do, which I just don't have enough legendary components for, is when you freeze an enemy, there's a 25% chance they become vulnerable. So I'm going to put that onto like my other ring, for example. Or onto my gloves, actually. I'm going to probably take Blizzard off of the gloves and put that onto my gloves. And that's pretty much the core of the build. So, let's look at some of the damage in action. So we're going to find this boss. The first thing we do is going to pop Frost Nova, pop Barrier, and then go Core Skills. Look at that. And dead. And then we're going to go Ultimate. Because the Ultimate is going to reduce all of our cooldowns.
I need time.
And now we have our Core Skill almost back again. The Frost Nova. So we can almost rinse and repeat. The second charge is going to make a huge, huge difference. The only thing is I don't have speed capabilities through the dungeons. So because I don't have the second Frost Nova, I kind of need to wait for my ultimate ability here before I go through and challenge this boss. Let's just wait that last 20 seconds. Oh yes. Lord Ritual is a god. Okay. There we go. Let's get into the boss fight. See what this build is made of. So this is World Tier 2, by the way. I mean, you don't have uptime. Just pop blizzards, right? Because the blizzards are gonna freeze enemies very nicely. Alright, here we go.
Time to prepare that.
gonna pop a bunch of blizzards. Oh, we gotta get feared here. That's okay.
I'm not ready
Dead.
yet.
I'm just saving my ultimate because I'm pretty sure there's a boss fight coming up here.
I'm not ready yet.
We're gonna pop our ultimate just to reduce our cooldowns. See how we have a barrier up? We're gonna get a lot of damage off that barrier up. And now we can pop Frost Nova again and do huge, chunky, big boy damage. Now we don't have any cooldowns yet, so first thing we're gonna do is that, and then bang. Boss fight, here we go. Just gonna wait. I'm kind of stuck. Here we go, 5 seconds. Let's go. First thing we're gonna do is Frost Nova, ready? A barrier up. See how much mana regen we already have here? Now we're gonna go into our ability. Our Ice Blades have just applied vulnerable to the Den Mother, and that's why we have it as an enchantment. Now we don't have much to do, so we're just gonna pop some blizzards. I hate when I teleport. So when the second charge of Frost Nova would help massively right now.
I'm not ready yet.
Down, we got our barrier up. Look at that huge damage. Ooh, knocked me on my ass.
Not ready yet.
So get on ya, we're gonna do that. Look how much core ability and mana regen we have. Now we got a barrier up, that's good. We're probably gonna finish off here, ready? Dead. Oh my gosh, I thought you were dead. Good night. So, that is the Frost Lord build. Alright, I'm Braven. Please come join me live on Twitch. I stream every Friday night from 5 PM PST and every second Sunday night from 5 PM PST. I'll see you for the next build video.